Several major airlines are suspending flights in and out of Israel. American, United, and Delta among the airlines canceling flights as the U.S. State Department has issued a travel advisory for the region.
United, Delta, and American Airlines just made 3 very different calls about flights to Israel, and one of them is already back in the skies. This is happening despite the government's warnings regarding visits to Israel.
The United States Level 4 travel warning against Israel being reduced just days after being raised, indicating an odd back and forth from the State Department.
But that's just the beginning. Behind the scenes, these airlines are also facing backlash over a secretive data sharing scandal that could affect millions of passengers.
American Airlines flight attendant is heading to prison for nearly 2 decades. You may remember this case. He taped his cell phone to an airplane toilet lid to secretly record young girls.
What's really driving these decisions, and who's being left in the dark? Join us as we reveal the shocking announcement from these airlines and more dark secrets. United, Delta, and American Airlines take different paths on Israel flights. Let's talk about a bold move that's got a lot of people talking. United Airlines just made a surprising decision. It's bringing back its flights to Israel, even though the U.S. government still warns travelers to be careful or avoid going there altogether. This is happening while Delta is also preparing to fly back there soon, and American Airlines is still holding back. So now we've got the 3 biggest U.S. airlines all taking very different positions on a sensitive issue. United Airlines is the first out of the gate, after suspending flights to Tel Aviv back in early May because of safety concerns. They've now brought them back, and even ahead of schedule. The New York to Tel Aviv route is up and running again, with 2 flights a day going each way. For a lot of people watching this closely, it's a pretty big deal. Let's show you why. It signals that United feels the situation on the ground has improved enough to start flying again. But here's the thing. The U.S. Department of State hasn't changed its travel warning since July 13th. That warning is still serious. It says Americans should reconsider travel to places like Tel Aviv and Jerusalem because of threats like terrorism and unrest. Besides, there are still full do not travel advisories in some parts of Israel, places near the Gaza Strip, near the borders with Lebanon and Syria, and close to Egypt. The government's language hasn't softened. In fact, they're still saying that violent incidents could happen with no warning, and they're telling Americans to be extra careful or just not go at all. So why is United jumping back in? From a business angle, it's no secret that airlines are trying to stay competitive. This summer has been one of the busiest travel periods in years. United has already announced its biggest international expansion ever, adding routes to 8 new cities across 4 continents. They've been aggressive in going after routes that others have dropped. So restarting flights to Tel Aviv kind of fits that pattern. They're not waiting around to see what the other airlines do. They're moving first. But United's not the only one making moves. Delta Airlines has also decided to get back in the game. They're not flying yet, but they've set a date, September 1st. That's when they plan to resume their own flights to Tel Aviv. On their website, they've even gone so far as to describe the city as a Mediterranean delight, highlighting the beaches, art, food, and history that make it a popular destination in more peaceful times. So now you've got 2 out of the 3 biggest U.S. airlines either flying or getting ready to fly to Israel again. But what about American Airlines? They're not budging. American hasn't flown to Israel since late 2023, and there's no sign they plan to go back anytime soon. With the conflict still unresolved and the U.S. government not backing down from its warnings, they've decided to stay away. Some people will say that's the more cautious choice, and others might say they're missing out. But either way, they're sticking to their position for now. These moves raise a lot of questions. For passengers, there's the issue of safety. If the U.S. government is still saying it's risky, should airlines be offering these flights at all? Are travelers going to feel comfortable booking tickets to a place that's still under official warnings? And what happens if things change again? We've seen how quickly airlines can cancel or reinstate routes depending on what's happening in the world. On the flip side, there's clearly a demand. Israel is an important destination for many people, whether it's for business, family, tourism, or religious reasons. United and Delta seem to be betting that there are enough travelers who are willing to go, even with the risks. It's also worth mentioning that this decision doesn't mean the airlines think the region is totally safe now. They're still taking precautions. Airline routes and scheduling decisions go through a lot of internal checks, and they usually don't restart a route without consulting with security experts and international authorities. But they also don't wait forever. If they think the conditions have improved enough to restart service, they'll do it, even if the official advisories haven't changed. For American Airlines, it's a different calculation. They might be looking at the same data as United and Delta and just reaching a different conclusion. Or maybe they're waiting to see if the situation keeps improving before they make a move. Whatever their reason, they're staying grounded for now when it comes to flights to Israel. So now we've got a split. United is already back, Delta is just weeks away, and American is still on the sidelines. All three are making big calls, and each one is taking a different approach. This kind of move can set the tone for the rest of the airline industry. Smaller carriers often watch what the big three are doing before they make their own decisions. If United and Delta see success, meaning full planes, smooth operations, and no safety issues, other airlines might follow. But if there are problems, delays, or even new security threats, it could change everything again. One thing is clear, this isn't just about flights and schedules. It's about how these companies respond to fast-changing global events. It's about risk, business, safety, and public confidence. And right now, each airline is playing a different hand. We'll have to wait and see which strategy ends up working best. The next chapter reveals a dark secret about these giant airlines. You don't want to miss it. Delta, United, and American Airlines private data scandal. So, just as we were watching the big three, United, Delta, and American, split on how to handle flights to Israel, there's something else going on that's really upsetting people. And this time, it's not about where they're flying. It's about what they've been doing with your data behind the scenes. Turns out, these airlines have quietly been part of something that's raising a lot of eyebrows, and not in a good way. A new report has come out showing that the big three, through a company they co-own, have been handing over flight records of American travelers to a government agency. Most folks had no idea this was happening, and the details are pretty uncomfortable. Let's break it down in a way that's easy to follow. So here's what's been uncovered. There's a company called the Airlines Reporting Corporation, ARC for short. Most people haven't heard of it, and that's kind of the point. It works behind the scenes, handling things like ticket transactions between airlines and travel agencies. But ARC does more than just settle payments. It also collects a ton of information from ticket bookings. And it turns out, they've been selling access to that info to the Department of Homeland Security, specifically to Customs and Border Protection, or CBP. What kind of information are we talking about? Passenger names, full flight itineraries, and even credit card data in some cases. Basically, if you booked a domestic flight in the US through a travel agency, think Expedia, Priceline, or even smaller agencies, your data likely ended up in ARC's system. And that data might have been passed along to CBP. What's especially troubling is that ARC didn't want anyone to know. According to documents that were released through a Freedom of Information Act request, ARC actually told the government not to reveal where the data came from. That's in the contract. It says CBP shouldn't name ARC unless a court forces them to. And here's the kicker. ARC isn't just some random third-party company. It's owned and run by the airlines themselves, including Delta, United, and American. So while passengers were booking trips, these airlines were quietly funneling their info to a company they control, which then sold it to the feds. People are not happy. After the story came out, social media exploded. Some called it a full-blown surveillance state, while others were just flat-out shocked. There were people saying they'll avoid these airlines completely from now on. One user even said they're switching to Amtrak for good. There's this sense of betrayal because for most folks, this wasn't common knowledge. And it's not just the public who's angry. Lawmakers are speaking up too. Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon called ARC a shady data broker and said the airlines need to answer for this. He also said that ARC has refused to cooperate with Congress on oversight. That's not a good look. The Department of Homeland Security has tried to explain why they want this data. They say it helps them track down people of interest, whether it's part of an investigation or to assist state and local police. But the issue here isn't just about whether the government needs the data, it's about how they're getting it. Instead of going through the usual legal process, like getting a warrant or subpoena, they're just buying the info from ARC. And that's what's got civil rights experts sounding the alarm. They say this kind of data is sensitive and it should only be used under proper legal oversight. Skipping that step by using a private company to get around privacy rules, that's a big deal. To be clear, this program isn't brand new. The Fed started buying data from ARC last year. The original contract was for a little over $11,000, not a huge amount by government standards, but they've already extended it into a second year. And it could keep going through 2029. Now, ARC claims that this whole thing started after 9/11 to help with national security. That might be true, but this latest report shows just how far it's gone and how little transparency there's been. For example, the data ARC sells can be searched by name, airline, or even credit card, and it's updated every single day. The database includes over 1 billion records covering both past and upcoming flights. That's a massive amount of info. Also, it doesn't just affect US citizens. Non-citizens are swept up in this too. That makes the scope even wider. Now here's something interesting. If you book your flight directly through the airline's website, your data probably won't show up in ARC's reports. The system mainly tracks bookings made through agencies. So that's a potential way for some people to avoid being part of this, but again, that's not something the airlines have openly shared with customers. Let's talk briefly about how all this fits into the bigger picture. Over the past few years, law enforcement agencies have been leaning more on private data brokers to collect information they wouldn't otherwise be allowed to get so easily. It's not just airline data. They've bought location data from smartphone apps, utility data from electric companies, and even internet traffic patterns. Critics are calling it a loophole. Instead of following strict rules meant to protect people's privacy, agencies are finding ways around them by writing checks. And once again, this is being done without most people knowing it's happening. That's the core of the problem here. It's not just about what the government is doing, it's about what the airlines are letting happen, or in this case, helping to make happen. All three of the big airlines, United, Delta, and American, have been quiet since the report dropped. They either didn't respond to questions or said they had no comment. Some directed reporters to ARC or to the government, but nobody really stepped forward to explain things or take responsibility. That silence? It's not helping. There's a growing call for Congress to step in and fix the so-called data broker loophole. Privacy groups are saying laws need to catch up with technology, and companies, especially ones that deal with millions of customers, shouldn't be allowed to sell personal data this easily, especially to the government. At the end of the day, this whole situation boils down to trust. People trust airlines with their lives when they board a flight. They also trust them with their personal information. That trust takes a hit when stories like this come out. And with everything else going on, like the decision to resume flights to Israel in the middle of a government warning, people are starting to ask, who are these airlines really looking out for? We'll keep watching to see if Congress takes action, if the airlines finally respond, or if this just gets swept under the rug. Either way, travelers deserve to know what's happening with their data. Because it's not just about where you're flying, it's about who's watching. In addition to all these, American Airlines still has other issues to deal with. Keep watching to find out what these issues are. American Airlines flight cuts and the Chicago showdown. Just as United and Delta are pushing forward, expanding routes, reopening international flights, and trying to get ahead in a busy summer travel season, American Airlines seems to be heading in a different direction. While its competitors are ramping up, American is pulling back. A lot of travelers notice something strange starting in August. Flights they usually count on just disappeared. American Airlines has canceled hundreds of scheduled flights. Not random cuts here and there, but whole routes and weekly departures that people rely on. It started with a scheduling change the airline made back in May, but the real impact is just hitting now. The changes are mostly centered around Chicago O'Hare, one of their major hubs. If you're flying out of O'Hare, here's what this means. 70 weekly departures are gone. Poof. That's less convenient for travelers heading to places like Dallas and Fort Worth, El Paso, Wilmington, LaGuardia, Kansas City, and Pittsburgh. These are not obscure routes. We're talking about key connections for business travelers, families, and even people making tight transfers. So cutting them isn't just a minor reshuffle, it's a big deal. Take the Chicago to Dallas route. It used to have 98 weekly departures. Now, it's down to 85. For El Paso and Wilmington, 7 weekly flights each were cut. 6 to New York's LaGuardia are gone. 5 fewer to Kansas City. And 3 to Pittsburgh. These numbers might seem small on paper, but for the people who count on those flights, especially on peak travel days, it changes everything. And here's the twist. Even with those cuts, American says it will still have 16.5% more flights from Chicago O'Hare in August than it did in 2024. So it's not pulling out of Chicago, but it's definitely reshaping how it serves that airport. Now, let's zoom out a little. Why are Americans doing this when travel demand is still strong? A big part of the story is competition and missteps. For starters, American hasn't been keeping up with Delta and United when it comes to premium services. While the other two are investing in upgraded lounges, new first-class seats, and better in-flight experiences, American's upgrades haven't quite kept pace. That matters more than ever now, because higher-paying customers want comfort, and if they don't get it with an American, they'll go somewhere else. But that's not the only reason. American also tried to cut travel agencies out of the booking process, pushing corporate travelers to book directly through its website. Sounds smart on paper. Cut out the middleman and save on commissions, right? But in reality, it backfired. Businesses that rely on travel agencies for booking flights found it easier to just switch to United or Delta. That one decision may have pushed away a big chunk of their most loyal customer base. Then there's the geographic strategy. American's route network is heavily centered on the Sun Belt, cities in the southern U.S., and doesn't have the same kind of broad reach that Delta and United have. That's fine when travel is booming, but when things get shaky, like during inflation or global uncertainty, that limited reach becomes a problem. Fewer strong international routes, less flexibility in reshuffling planes, and a tighter grip on specific markets all add up to less resilience. But the Chicago cuts aren't just about numbers and routes. There's a legal battle brewing behind the scenes that's making things even messier. American Airlines is now in a fight with the city of Chicago over gates at O'Hare. Gates are a big deal in the airline world. They control how many flights you can run in and out of an airport, and Americans are at risk of losing 4 of them. American says they had a deal with the city going back to 2018. Losing those gates, they argue, goes against that agreement. So they've taken the city to court. They filed a lawsuit back in May, and in July they took it even further by asking a federal judge to step in and block the gate transfer. According to American Airlines, this dispute couldn't come at a worse time. They claim that gate assignments are being recalculated based on outdated numbers, and they're warning the court that if something isn't done by October 1st, the damage could be permanent. In other words, once those gates go to another airline, maybe even a competitor, getting them back later will be next to impossible. The big picture shows an airline that's struggling to keep up, while its biggest rivals are gaining ground. What are your thoughts about these huge announcements? Kindly share your answers, thoughts, and opinions in the comments section. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to this channel to enjoy more videos like this. Also, Click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.